Hi, and welcome to Fulfilling Career, Happy Life. As you know, the topics that I select for these podcasts and the guests that I invite to discuss them with, it's very much based on themes that I see with my clients and issues that I see coming up. Once you notice them, they seem to come up more. They seem to run in packs. And something that has been coming up lately, both in my work with individuals and my work with corporate leadership teams, is the importance of comfort with conflict. And by that, I don't mean any kind of conflict. We're not talking, a barroom brawl here. We're talking about the right kind of conflict. We're talking about the conflict that allows you to bring up the topics that need to be discussed, that allows you to disagree in the right way with the people with whom you need to make these decisions. It's that kind of conflict, but it can feel like the negative kind of conflict. It can bring up a lot of stuff for us. Conflict is deeply rooted for us in terms of how we were raised, how our family dealt with it. Gender differences, whether or not you have siblings, can actually make a big difference in your comfort with conflict. So it's a deeply rooted thing for us. And it can impact how we show up and definitely how we lead. So I wanted to toss that one around with someone who I knew would be the perfect person to talk to about that. So I'm thrilled to welcome Teresa Rand. Teresa is a business coach, works with individuals and businesses, and runs Teresa Rand Consulting. She also has a community, of which I am part, called the Boss Lady Women's Leadership Community, putting out all kinds of great content through her own podcast and writing and things like that, which we'll tell you more about. But I'm very excited to have her here, and welcome, Teresa.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Randy. I look forward to our conversation. This is always a conversation that comes up in the work that I do, whether I'm working with a business or I'm working with an individual. It's how do we handle conflict? Because we know it's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
We're humans.
Yeah, absolutely. And, to that point, I think one of the things that people don't recognize is that stress that can come up with conflict, which could feel big or small. It could feel, your boss could be giving you side eye and you create a story in your head about what that's about. Or it could be someone says something in a meeting that must be addressed, that kind of thing. But when that shows up, it triggers that stress reaction that we as humans have, that fight or flight that can sort of pull you out of your own head. How do you see this showing up in the clients with whom you have these conversations?
Randy, I mostly see it showing up in group dynamics when I work with a team within an organization. And I go in and start with my organizational work, usually with a personality assessment of some type. And there are many out there. I do DISC, I do strengths, do one called Code Breaker. Just depends on what the needs of the company are. But they all tell us the same thing, and it's that we are who we are, regardless of how the results are written. The ultimate is that they're all very similar because we are who we are, regardless of the assessment. But they all talk about how do we handle conflict. And as you said in your opening, we all handle conflict very differently based on how we were raised, where we fall in the birth order, all of those things, where we are in the hierarchy of an organization, if you will. How much do we internalize? How much do we speak up? Those are different ways of handling conflict. And there are times when both are appropriate, but we have to pre plan and pre think about and be self aware of what is our natural tendency when it comes to conflict. It's not time to think about it when you're in the midst of it.
That is so true. That is so true. And we tend to plan for a lot of other things. We plan for, like, if we're going to a meeting, we plan for what's our message? What position are we advocating for? Who's going to be there? Have we aligned things with them? But we don't often think about how are we going to handle conflict if it comes up. And I think you're really wise to say that, because in that moment when you have that emotional reaction, really, isn't the time to figure out how you want to do it. And a lot of times, if we haven't thought about it, it can become much bigger in our heads than it even is.
Right. Because we have a natural tendency in how we behave. And when we're under stress, that natural tendency is magnified. So if our natural tendency is to lash out, then when we're under stress, we're not going to take the time to say, "Ooh, I need to take a deep breath," or "I need to walk away," or "I need to sit quietly until not I can speak in a way that is not making others defensive." Or am I a person that internalizes conflict? So I get in a meeting and I don't have to walk away. I don't have to do anything because I'm not going to speak until after the fact.
Yeah.
Then I'm going to stew, and then I'm going to maybe play the victim, and then I'm going to talk to somebody that can't solve the problem as opposed to the person that I have the conflict with. So we need to know those things about ourselves and prepare. What if someone disagrees with me when I make this presentation? What if someone disagrees with me when we have this conversation within our family, even?
Yeah.
How am I going to react? I call it the what if game. What if this happens? What am I going to do? What if this happens? What am I going to do? So that, and it's kind of cliche at this point, but we want to be proactive instead of reactive.
Yeah. I think that's really important. And I think what you're saying, in terms of many of us, if conflict comes up, we're silent. That may be the reaction because we need time to think and process. But think about what the impact that may leave on the rest of the room. Someone has nothing to say. And others may recognize that there's conflict, and then you sort of get identified as someone who doesn't stand up for themselves or their ideas.
Or that you agreed.
Great point.
You agree by default. Well, she didn't say anything. Why is she complaining now?
Yeah.
We had the meeting and she said nothing.
Yeah.
So the assumption is she agrees.
Right.
Which may not
silence
be the
can
case.
be taken for agreement. It's true.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And the after the fact is it just wastes so much time. You might not be able to unwind it. You got to align a lot of other people in the room, and you spend so much time getting in your own head about what you could have said, what you should have said.
Right. Right. And often we don't speak up, and this is it's not just women, but it is more women, because we have a fear of how we're going to be seen, especially if we're in direct conflict with someone where we're on the opposite side of the issue. It's the whole double bind theory for women. If we speak up, we're seen as too aggressive, or the infamous B word. If we don't speak up, we're seen as too soft and we don't take a stand. So what the heck are we supposed to do? And we have to really think about that ahead of time. Quick example, my oldest daughter sits on a board, and they had a committee meeting about some allocations, that kind of thing, the other day. And there were like 6 people in the meeting. They decided where to put the money, where not to put the money, all of these things. And there was one particular person in the conversation that did not say anything until it was time to call for the vote. And then she exploded on how she disagreed with everything everybody had said. And the meeting was coming to an end. It was the very moment in time where my daughter was calling for the vote because they'd had the discussion. Well, what happened is nobody really listened to her at that point because she was speaking out of anger. She said, I vehemently and I'm paraphrasing, but I disagree with everything that's been said. Well, you waited till the last 5 minutes to tell us that? So they called for the vote and they voted against what she wanted. The time for us to speak up is during the conversation, not when we sit there and we stew over it and then we lash out. it's too late then.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to hear
Yeah.
us with that type of behavior.
Yeah. And I can only imagine what was going on in her mind during the rest of the
The whole
discussion.
time. Right.
Yeah.
The entire time.
Yeah. And that damages her relationships with the others and all
With
kinds of things.
everybody in the meeting.
Yeah, that's a
Right.
shame.
Yes.
So how do you recommend people do approach this? Like in the group dynamic setting, obviously, if they're in a meeting with a group of people and there's a situation that they disagree with, how do you recommend they handle
Yeah,
it?
the first thing is we need to try to understand where the other person is coming from. So if we can ask questions, tell me more about why you think that. Tell me more about why that is your point of view. And that doesn't set the person up to be defensive. The alternative is, well, I totally disagree with that. All of a sudden, the other person has become defensive and they're either going to lash out or they're going to shut down, depending on how they behave. So asking questions would tell me more about why you think that. But then you can't hide behind what you really think. I appreciate and value your opinion, but here's what I think. And can we think about it this way? Or have you thought about it this way? As opposed to, you're wrong and here's how we should do it. And we joke and think that those are um, things that aren't really said and don't really happen. I can tell you, I've been in many meetings where it absolutely happens and it shuts down the
Yeah.
conversation.
I've
People
seen it.
start taking sides. Sorry, excuse me.
No, I've seen it too. And I think in an organization, the power dynamic really
Right.
comes into play here. If that's the boss that says that, you can bet everyone's going to shut down, but it's not going to
Right.
stop I mean, I've seen in meetings, they start texting each other. Or, if
Yes.
it's a virtual
Yes.
meeting, the IMs are going.
Yep.
And all of a sudden the whole feeling, productivity opportunity of the meeting has shifted. And sometimes the boss doesn't even know it.
Right. The boss doesn't even know it. A good leader will ask a lot of questions.
Yeah,
What
absolutely.
I'm trying to think of this saying, input by many, decisions by few. Ultimately, the leader does have to make the decision,
Yeah.
but they don't have to mandate it. If the building's on fire, yes, they have to mandate it. Everybody get up, everybody get out. But we're talking about a normal Monday morning staff meeting.
Right.
Allow people to share their thoughts in a safe environment. And a good leader can do that
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
not just mandate what's going to happen.
Absolutely. And a lot of our listeners are both leaders and have leaders.
Right.
Even after the CEO, they have a board.
Absolutely.
So, they're dealing with those dynamics all around them. I think one of the things that can be important too, when these conflicts come up and someone has the courage to say what they need to say and hopefully ask the question, staying curious, it unlocks a lot of things. But there may come a point where the discussion has to end and there has to be the decision is made. And
Right.
to the example you gave, it may be the boss making the decision. But it can be really helpful to put some closure on it too, just even to acknowledge, I understand we're not all in complete agreement. Can everyone
Right.
support the decision? Rather than,
Absolutely.
okay, it's time to vote. Let's go.
Right. Exactly. I heard what you said. However, from my seat, this is the decision I have to make. And I respectfully ask for your support.
Right.
Because the worst is to go out and then start saying, well, I voted for it, but only because I had to, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
The time to have the conflict is in the room with people that can make this that are part of the solution, not in the parking lot conversations after the fact.
Yeah, for sure. It was interesting. 2 weeks ago, I was doing a leadership conference with an executive team, and they were discussing a certain issue. And one, there were differences of opinion. It wasn't a passionate discussion, but it was a thoughtful, important discussion. And towards the end, the leader was bringing it to a close, and one of the members of the team who had a dissenting opinion said, I understand, I disagree, I support the decision. And it just seemed so powerful to me.
It is very
as
powerful.
A way of showing up and being heard, and yet, getting on board with something that he could live with, even if it wasn't his first choice.
Right. Absolutely. And that is the sign of a mature leader.
Yeah.
When they can do that. This is not a temper tantrum where there's only one toy and we're going to throw a fit if we don't get it.
Yeah.
We're adults in the room. And the first tip, if you will, is we have to know conflict is going to happen.
Yeah.
It's just a given. Whether it's at home or it's at work, conflict is going to arise. So the more we can think about how we're going to handle it on the front end, the more prepared we are. Like you said, we prepare for everything else. Why not prepare for somebody might not agree with us, right?
Yeah.
And how we're going to handle that. Because the other thing, Randy, is conflict is necessary.
Yeah.
You're not going to grow without being uncomfortable a little bit.
Oh, I completely agree with you. And, getting comfortable being uncomfortable is so critical. It's interesting because, yes, we have to anticipate that conflict will happen, and conflict is good. And I would say one other thing is, if you don't have conflict on your team, you ought to question who you have on your team and how you're leading it.
Absolutely.
Because
Absolutely.
If you never hear other opinions, you can probably do this yourself.
Absolutely. Because there are other opinions out there.
Yeah.
So either you can do it yourself or you're a dictator.
Yeah, well,
and people are afraid to give you their true thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's one or the two.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
When I said you can do it yourself, I guess I was being completely facetious, because if you have the right people on your team and you're open to the discussion, you should be having that conversation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the other extreme is people that just enjoy conflict.
It's true. It's sport.
And there are those people out there. And you have to kind of figure out how to maneuver that if you're leading a team as well. How do I handle that person that is always causing conflict?
Yeah.
They still need to be listened to, but there's a tactful, respectful, but firm way of saying, okay, we've heard your point of view. Now it's time to hear someone else's.
Yeah, absolutely.
In leading that team, because inevitably the loudest voice, and often that's a male voice, is the one that gets heard the most.
Yeah, it's true. And there's sort of two levels of leadership on that. There's how do you handle it in the moment, as you suggest, let's hear from someone else, that kind of behavior. But then there's the coaching that might need to happen one-on-one behind closed doors to shape that behavior going forward in a way that respects the person.
Absolutely. And one of the notes I made in preparation was private, not public. There are times where you might stop a behavior in the moment, but you don't chastise in public.
Yeah.
You redirect. Again, we go back to that child pitching a temper tantrum. We redirect them.
Yeah.
As opposed to punishing them in the moment.
Yeah.
We first try to redirect, and then we have a conversation about why that was not appropriate in that setting. Appropriate way to handle the conflict.
Yeah. The situation that you described comes up so often, which is the loudest voice often is the one that's listened to, or the idea that's pursued, or something.
Right.
And as leaders, we have to make space for people that aren't always the first one to speak. They may have things that are absolutely worth listening to, but they need a moment to put it together, or to share it. And so we have to bring that out. I think about two leaders that I work with, if they're doing brainstorming sessions, it's interesting to see the dynamic on a team. If there is a fear or inability to deal with conflict in a healthy way, a lot of times the first idea that comes out in the brainstorming is the one everyone follows.
Yeah.
Like, wait a minute. Let's get the ball rolling. Right. And so I've worked with teams before. Okay, any brainstorming session, there have to be at least 3 ideas put forward before we decide we're going to follow one. And so
Absolutely.
sometimes putting that structure in place takes it away from, wait a minute, so and so hasn't spoken up, so we're not calling them out. Or,
Right.
yeah, we always hear from you first. Your idea isn't always the one. So sometimes
Right.
that structure can help.
Right. There's also, when I've been with a group that I really don't know the players, if I'm facilitating and we're trying to do brainstorming, I have everybody write their ideas on a post-it note and then take it to the wall. We've all been in the room with the conference room with all the um, flip chart paper stuck to the wall. But that's a way that people feel safe to put an idea out. They
Yeah.
just write it on a sticky note, then we have conversation about it.
Yeah.
Because not everybody is comfortable speaking up in a group.
Absolutely. I'm laughing as you say that because right before we sat down to do this recording, I was packing for a trip I'm leaving for later today to go travel to do some leadership workshops. And I've got sticky notes in my bag.
They are facilitators' best friend.
Yeah, they are. It's important to make sure all the voices get heard. Yeah, absolutely. So if someone is feeling that they're not entirely like they're bought into our discussion that conflict is important, but they're feeling as though they're at a disadvantage. They're not good at it. They're not comfortable with it, that kind of thing. How can they sort of get started?
I think the best thing, and I'm, full transparency, I do personality assessments. So, certainly I'd be glad to do that work with anybody. But you can go online and take different assessments too. It doesn't really matter what assessment you take, but I am a huge fan of taking some type of personality assessment so you can see in writing how you deal with conflict, because they all tell you. Even if you take Gallup strengths and you get a report, and it just lists your 5 strengths, there's still areas in there that tell you. But over and above that, it's to have someone else work with you on understanding the report. We can all read our report, but we even in when it's in black and white, we see what we want to see, and maybe the rest doesn't quite register.
Yeah.
And then just ask people, hey, excuse me, ask whoever you live with. If you live with people,
They'll have an answer.
they will let you know. How would you say, ask your spouse, your significant other, or a teenage child will certainly tell you, how do you think I deal with conflict? And just become self aware.
Yeah.
Because you deal with it somehow, either lashing out, shutting down, whatever. You deal with it because nobody gets through life without having conflict. It's not possible. So
Yeah.
you are dealing with it some way. Figure out what that way is.
I think I really agree with what you're saying. And it's remarkable to me how often someone comes to me for, a very career focused problem. I just took over as chief commercial officer of this company and I need some support while I'm dealing with this new level of accountability, that very focused thing. But we almost always start digging into the inner work for them so that they can develop that self-awareness of why do they do certain things in a certain
Right.
way, because it becomes reflexive for us. So I completely agree with you. Digging into building that self-awareness on our approach to
Right.
conflict is the place to start. And something else you said I think is so important, which is get some help, get some support. Conflict is between you and other people. Don't think that the answer has to be just between you and you.
Right.
Like if it's a
Exactly.
coach, if it's a friend, if it's a partner, whatever it is,
Exactly.
talk it through and get some other ideas so that you can approach it differently. And it's building a skill like anything else.
It is definitely a skill, and it's not a skill that a lot of people have mastered. This can really make you unique, make you stand out. If you become the problem solver, that doesn't mean you have all the answers, but you become the facilitator of problem solving.
Yeah.
That's a very unique skill, a unique skill set that is needed on every team.
Yeah.
There needs to be that person that can bring the conversation. And it's not always the boss, not always the CEO. Even if the CEO mandates something, usually there's a team that has to bring it to fruition.
Yeah.
So you're going to get in the the meeting with the CEO, and she's going to tell you to do something, but then you've got to work with a team to get it done and bring things back to the table. So you're going to work with different people, and there's different styles of conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's interesting, something that you said about, as a leader, you may have to be the facilitator of coming to agreement, or at least dealing with conflict, that kind of thing. It doesn't always have to be the leader of the group. So really the time to develop the skill is when you're part of the group. And I mean, it's never too late, but to the point you made, you can make yourself stand out. That may be how you become noticed as the person who could be the future leader.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
Then to the leaders we're speaking to, how do you cultivate that in others? How do you make it okay for them to build that skill?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It is a skill that is needed. And a lot of times when I'm hired to work with an organization, it is because of communication issues. And once you dig in, it's because they're not dealing respectfully or helpful with conflict.
Yeah. I agree.
There's all these elephants in the room that nobody's talking about.
Yeah. You kind of have to build trust first, but that's a different podcast episode.
That is a whole nother episode. You definitely have to build trust first to have healthy and respectful conflict.
Yeah.
You have to trust the person on the opposite end.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that comes first.
Yeah, I appreciate all your thoughts. So, some of the things I've picked up so much in what you've said. I loved where you started in terms of really staying curious, understand the other's perspective before coming to a conclusion, appreciating that conflict is going to arise. If we're doing dynamic things out in the world, conflict is going to happen. Knowing our own proclivities, our own tendencies when it comes to conflict is really important, and to practice the skill.
Right.
So that you can develop it.
Yeah. And, one of the things we didn't say that I think is important is to be willing to change your mind.
Oh, say a little more about that. That's important.
You may get into a situation where you know ahead of time where you stand on an issue. And then when you start asking people, tell me more about why you believe that. Tell me more about why you think that to be true. You may go, oh, I haven't thought about it that way.
Yeah.
So don't let your ego be part of the conversation.
Yeah. Oh, that's really powerful. And it's amazing how often I'm talking to a client and they may have come to a conclusion about something. And once we come to a conclusion, we're really good at finding lots of evidence why we're right.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But
confirmation bias.
There you go. Absolutely. Yes. But then if I say, well, what's another way we could look at that? And we sort of flip it over just for fun, just to stretch that muscle. And they realize that, wait a minute, maybe I am convincing myself of my own opinion.
Right. And, the magic word is compromise. Back in the day, I think it was Stephen Covey who said, win-win. Can we get a win-win? Yeah. And more often than not, we can.
Yeah.
We don't, it's not one way or the highway. It's not my way or the highway. Unfortunately, we don't see a lot of that taking place in our current leadership that we're watching go on. It's my way or the highway, no matter what. We can't operate that way, or we shouldn't operate that way. There is a middle ground.
Yeah.
There is a middle ground.
No, it's funny because when I was in grad school and business school, negotiation skills was one of my favorite classes. And I was left with such a powerful sense of the win-win.
Yeah. Yeah. There is a way that everybody walks out being supportive and content, even if they didn't get everything they want.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not by avoiding conflict.
It's not by avoiding conflict. Absolutely not. Conflict is necessary.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. All right. I want to have you back on because we could continue this conversation a lot. So hopefully we will do this again. But I'm so grateful that you came on to talk about this. It's a really important topic.
It is an important topic. Thank you so much for having me. It's always good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Teresa.
All right. Talk soon.